Hello! If you are tuning into this video, most likely your semester 1 final exam for English class is coming up. This video is going to go through the passages that will be on your final exam. Let's go ahead and pull up our study guide. All right, so on our study guide, you are going to see this table that talks about the different questions you'll see on the exam. So there are 30 questions total. There are going to be passages from 3 different stories we read. The first being Most Dangerous Game, there'll be 1 passage. Scarlet Ibis, there'll be a passage. And then To Kill a Mockingbird, we're going to pull 3 passages from there, all of which will be covered in this video. It also shows you what type of questions to expect on the exam. And if you're interested in preparing for the type of questions you'll see on the exam, you'll find different practice activities in your Buzz agenda and landing page. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our passage. So we're going to start with our short stories. The first passage is going to be on the Most Dangerous Game. So you have a little context for this passage. This passage comes when Zaroff is talking about how hunting is beginning to bore him. We hear this passage prior to him revealing to Rainsford that he hunts human beings. All right, let's go ahead and get started. After the debacle in Russia, I left the country, for it was imprudent for an officer of the Tsar to stay there. Many noble Russians lost everything. I, luckily, had invested heavily in American securities, so I shall never have to open a tea room in Monte Carlo or drive a taxi in Paris. Naturally, I continued to hunt. Grizzlies in your Rockies, crocodiles in the Ganges, rhinoceroses in East Africa. It was in Africa that the Cape buffalo hit me and laid me up for 6 months. As soon as I recovered, I started for the Amazon to hunt jaguars, for I had heard they were unusually cunning. They weren't. The Cossack sighed. They were no match at all for a hunter with his wits about him and a high-powered rifle. I was bitterly disappointed. I was lying in my tent with a splitting headache one night when a terrible thought pushed its way into my mind. Hunting was beginning to bore me, and hunting, remember, had been my life. I have heard in America businessmen often go to pieces when they give up the business that has been their life. All right, that is the first passage that'll be on your exam. It is going to account for questions 1 through 5. I highly encourage you to check out the Most Dangerous Game Skills Builder. It'll contain this passage and it will give you an idea of the type of questions you will see on the exam. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next passage, which is taken from the Scarlet Ibis. This passage will be for questions 6 through 11. Just to give you a little context for this passage, our narrator is never named, so we'll refer to him as Brother, and he has a younger brother named Doodle who he is disappointed in and ashamed of because he can't walk and he has some physical disabilities. And so in this passage, we are going to see Brother try to explain to Doodle why he's going to teach him to walk. We were down in Old Woman's Swamp, and it was spring, and the sick, sweet smell of bayflowers hung everywhere like a mournful song. "I'm going to teach you to walk, Doodle," I said. He was sitting comfortably on the soft grass, leaning back against the pine. "Why?" he asked. I hadn't expected such an answer. "So I won't have to haul you around all the time." "I can't walk, Brother," he said. "Who says so?" I demanded. "Mama, the doctor, everybody?" "Oh, you can walk," I said, and I took him by the arms and stood him up. He collapsed onto the grass like a half-empty flour sack. It was as if he had no bones in his little legs. "Don't hurt me, Brother," he warned. "Shut up. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to teach you to walk." I heaved him up again, and again he collapsed. This time he did not lift his face up out of the rubber grass. "I just can't do it. Let's make honeysuckle wreaths." "Oh, yes, you can, Doodle," I said. "All you gotta do is try. Now come on." And I hauled him up once more. It seemed so hopeless from the beginning that it's a miracle I didn't give up. But all of us must have something to be proud of, and Doodle had become mine. I did not know then that pride is a wonderful, terrible thing, a seed that bears 2 vines, life and death. Every day that summer we went to the pine beside the stream of Old Woman's Swamp, and I put him on his feet at least 100 times each afternoon. Occasionally, I too became discouraged because it didn't seem as if he was trying, and I would say, "Doodle, don't you want to learn to walk?" He'd nod his head, and I'd say, "Well, if you don't keep trying, you'll never learn." Then I'd paint for him a picture of us as old men, white-haired, him with the long white beard, and me still pulling him around in the go-kart. This never failed to make him try again. Finally, one day, after many weeks of practicing, he stood alone for a few seconds. When he fell, I grabbed him in my arms and hugged him, our laughter pealing through the swamp like a ringing bell. Now we knew it could be done. Hope no longer hid in the dark palmetto thicket, but perched like a cardinal in the lacy toothbrush tree, brilliantly visible. "Yes, yes," I cried, and he cried too. And the grass beneath us was soft, and the smell of the swamp was sweet. With success so imminent, we decided not to tell anyone until he could actually walk. Each day, barring rain, we sneaked into Old Woman's Swamp, and by cotton-picking time, Doodle was ready to show what he could do. He still wasn't able to walk far, but we could wait no longer. Keeping a nice secret is very hard to do, like holding your breath. We chose to reveal all on October 8th, Doodle's 6th birthday, and for weeks ahead we mooned around the house, promising everybody a most spectacular surprise. Aunt Nicey said that after so much talk, if we produced anything less tremendous than the resurrection, she was going to be disappointed. All right, that is the second passage. Again, I would recommend checking out the Scarlet Ibis Skills Builder to help you review this passage. Next up, we have our To Kill a Mockingbird passages. The first passage is going to be the trees dying passage. To give you a little bit of context, in this passage, Jem and Scout have decided they need to thank the person who's been putting gifts in the knothole. Later, we're going to find out that this person is Boo Radley. But they want to deliver this note, but when they go to put the letter in the knothole of the tree, it's been cemented up. And this clearly really, really bothers Jem in this passage, and he reacts very strongly to the knothole being filled. All right, and this is going to count for questions 12 through 18 on your final exam. Next morning on the way to school, he ran ahead of me and stopped at the tree. Jem was facing me when he looked up, and I saw him go stark white. "Scout!" I ran to him. Someone had filled our knothole with cement. "Don't you cry now, Scout. Don't cry now. Don't you worry," he muttered at me all the way to school. When we went home for dinner, Jem bolted his food, ran to the porch, and stood on the steps. I followed him. "Hasn't passed by yet," he said. Next day, Jem repeated his vigil and was rewarded. "Howdy-do, Mr. Nathan," he said. "Mornin', Jem. Scout," said Mr. Radley as he went by. "Mr. Radley," said Jem. Mr. Radley turned around. "Mr. Radley, did you put cement in that hole in that tree down yonder?" "Yes," he said. "I filled it up." "Why'd you do it, sir?" "Trees dyin'. You plug 'em up with cement when they're sick. You ought to know that, Jem." Jem said nothing more about it until late afternoon. When we passed our tree, he gave it a meditative pat on its cement and remained deep in thought. He seemed to be working himself into a bad humor, so I kept my distance. As usual, we met Atticus coming home from work that evening. When we were at our steps, Jem said, "Atticus, look down yonder at that tree, please, sir." "What tree, son?" "The one on the corner of the Radley lot, coming from school." "Yes." "Is that tree dying?" "Why, no, son, I don't think so. Look at the leaves. They're all green and full. No brown patches anywhere." "It ain't even sick." "That tree is as healthy as you are, Jem. Why?" "Mr. Nathan Radley said it was dying." "Well, maybe it is. I'm sure Mr. Radley knows more about his trees than we do." Atticus left us on the porch. Jem leaned on a pillar, rubbing his shoulders against it. "Do you itch, Jem?" I asked as politely as I could. He did not answer. "Come on in, Jem," I said. After a while, he stood there until nightfall, and I waited for him. When he went in the house, I saw he had been crying. His face was dirty in all the right places, but I thought it odd that I had not heard him. All right, that is the first To Kill a Mockingbird passage on your exam, and there is also a skills builder available here for you to practice with. Our next passage is going to be over Miele's testimony. So remember, a big part of part 2 of the novel we see revolves around the trial of Tom Robinson. And so Tom Robinson is being accused of raping Miele Ewell, and this is going to be her testimony. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Miele looked from under lowered eyelids at Atticus, but she said to the judge, "Long as he keeps calling me ma'am and saying Miss Miele, I don't have to take his sass. I ain't called upon to take it." Atticus resumed his stroll to the windows and let Judge Taylor handle this one. Judge Taylor was not the kind of figure that ever evoked pity, but I did feel a pang for him as he tried to explain. "That's just Mr. Finch's way," he told Miele. "We've done business in this court for years and years, and Mr. Finch is always courteous to everybody. He's not trying to mock you. He's trying to be polite. That's just his way." The judge leaned back. "Atticus, let's get on with these proceedings and let the record show that the witness has not been sassed, her views to the contrary." I wondered if anybody had ever called her ma'am or Miss Miele in her life. Probably not, as she took offense to routine courtesy. What on earth was her life like? I soon found out. "You say you're 19, Atticus resumed. "How many sisters and brothers have you?" He walked from the window back to the stand. "7, she said, and I wondered if they were all like the specimen I had seen the first day I started to school. Atticus was quietly building up before the jury a picture of the Ewells' home life. The jury learned the following things. Their relief check was far from enough to feed the family, and there was a strong suspicion that Papa drank it up anyway. He sometimes went off in the swamp for days and came home sick. The weather was seldom cold enough to require shoes, but when it was, you could make dandy ones from the strips of old tires. The family hauled its water in buckets from a spring that ran at one end of the dump. They kept the surrounding area clear of trash, and it was everybody for himself as far as keeping clean went. If you wanted to wash, you hauled your own water. The children had perpetual colds and suffered from chronic ground itch. There was a lady who came around sometimes and asked Miele why she didn't stay in school. She wrote down the answer. With 2 members of the family reading and writing, there was no need for the rest of them to learn. Papa needed them at home. "Miss Miele," said Atticus in spite of himself, "a 19-year-old girl like you must have friends. Who are your friends?" The witness frowned as if puzzled. "Friends?" "Yes, don't you know anyone near your age or older, younger? Boys and girls, just ordinary friends." Miele's hostility, which had subsided to grudging neutrality, flared again. "You making fun of me again, Mr. Finch?" Atticus let her question answer his. "Do you love your father, Miss Miele?" was his next. "Love him? What you mean?" "I mean, is he good to you? Is he easy to get along with?" "He does tolerable, except when... Miele looked at her father, who was sitting with his chair tipped against the railing. He sat up straight and waited for her to answer. "'Cept when nothing," said Miele. "I said he does tolerable." Mr. Ewell leaned back again. "Except when he's drinking?" asked Atticus so gently that Miele nodded. All right, again, there is a skills builder available. If you go into Buzz, there's also some practice questions over this passage. All right, our next passage and our last passage, so this will cover questions 26 through 30, is going to be a passage that takes place right after the trial has occurred. It was Jem's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through the cheerful crowd. "It ain't right," he muttered all the way to the corner of the square where we found Atticus waiting. Atticus was standing under the streetlight looking as though nothing had happened. His vest was buttoned, his collar and tie were neatly in place. His watch chain glistened. He was his impassive self again. "It ain't right, Atticus," said Jem. "No, son, it's not right." We walked home. Aunt Alexandra was waiting up. She was in her dressing gown, and I could have sworn she had on a corset underneath it. I'm sorry, brother, she murmured. Having never heard her call Atticus brother before, I stole a glance at Jem, but he was not listening. He would look up at Atticus, then down at the floor, and I wondered if he thought Atticus was somehow responsible for Tom Robinson's conviction. Is he all right? Auntie asked, indicating Jem. He'll be so presently, said Atticus. It was a little too strong for him. Our father sighed. I'm going to bed, he said. If I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me. I didn't think it was wise in the first place to let them. This is their home, sister, said Atticus. We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it. But they don't have to go to the courthouse and wallow in it. It's just as much Macomb County as missionary teas. Atticus, Aunt Alexandra's eyes were anxious. You are the last person I thought would turn bitter over this. I'm not bitter, just tired. I'm going to bed. Atticus, said Jem bleakly. He turned in the doorway. What, son? How could they do it? How could they? I don't know, but they did it. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again. And when they do it, seems that only children weep. Good night. But things are always better in the morning. Atticus rose at his usual ungodly hour and was in the living room behind the mobile register when we stumbled in. Jem's morning face posed the question his sleep lips struggled to ask. It's not time to worry yet, Atticus reassured him as we went to the dining room. We're not through yet. There'll be an appeal. You can count on that. Alrighty, those are the passages you will see on your final exam. Make sure you are looking over the review resources your teacher has provided, and if you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to your teacher.